Okay, we're about to start. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Talafalava, Malo Lele, Kiorana, Yakwe. Talofa to all the participants joining us from across the region. It's a pleasure to once again welcome you to our second virtual regional training on environmental and social sustainability. Are you able to hear me? Could I ask everybody to put on their camera, please? It'd be nice to see all of you. Hi. Hello, hi. Well, that's good. All right, well, as I mentioned, welcome. It's a pleasure to welcome you again, and I want to thank you for taking time to participate in our regional training. Many of you joined us from last year, and I want to thank you for that excellent participation, particularly those who completed the evaluation forms that we had, and many of you had received training certificates. The importance of that evaluation was that we were able to collect information from you to help us design more topics for this second round and possibly other rounds that may follow. So the modules that we've scheduled throughout for this second round are largely informed by the comments that you made in the evaluation. So I want to thank all of you again for joining us. It's fantastic to have you here. As you know, we're starting today. We're starting the round right up to the 8th of December. And we have some exciting topics and some training from the Pacific Learning Partnership for Environmental and Social Sustainability, namely the World Bank, ADB, the University of the South Pacific, and the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment Program. So all the trainers are coming by way of the partners, and I want to thank them as well in advance. So many of you would have received the invitation and also the attachments of the training schedules and the training plan, which contains some sort of description under each of the training topics to give you an idea what is the motivation, the narrative behind the coming up with a topic. So for today's module, it's titled The Application of Geographical Information System, or GIS, and Remote Sensing for EIA Studies. So I'll read a bit of the narrative just to start us off and give you an idea about why we've had this topic. So the Pacific region is often characterized with data paucity, which is perpetuated by the lack of individual, systemic, and institutional capacity among national governments to properly collect, analyze, and store data and information for policymaking. Now, for national EIA regulators, abilities to effectively regulate for sustainable development are restricted to limited information or lack thereof at their disposal, often hampering reviews of EIA reports and monitoring for compliance activities. So as you know, this is one of the reasons why we've chosen GIS. Obviously, information is a broad topic. There's no way for us to to touch every aspect of it, but we have chosen specifically the GIS because of its very unique role in EIA and safeguards compliance. So we have with us trainers, specialists working in SPREP, but based in Fiji, Viti-Levu. I want to welcome Ms. Kasanga Tora. She is the spatial analysis specialist for protected areas in SPREP. And I also want to welcome Vani Koroi Samanunu, environmental GIS specialist in the Inform project here at SPREP. These two ladies have unique knowledge and experience of applying GIS in EIA, particularly Fiji, so you will get to hear from that. And they have combined experience of over 20 plus years, so very, very knowledgeable indeed. I would now hand over, perhaps just before I hand over to the trainers, a few notes, please. Those of you who want to send messages, do use the chat box there, and we're able to pick up some of the questions you want. You could also use the check reaction icon at the bottom where you can raise up your hand and we will come to you. But at all times, please mute your microphone so we can have a good experience. So I want to thank you for your patience, and I'll hand over now to both wonderful ladies. Bula Vinaka, ladies, thank you for your time, and I hope you don't mind. I'll hand you over the floor. Vinaka.
Bula Vinaka, everyone. Are we clear on the audio?
Yeah, very loud and clear.
That's great.
Thank you. Bula. Thank you, Mayor Pello, for that very brief introduction for myself and Kasanga. I am Vani, and my colleague is Kasanga on my right, so please do mind that we are sharing a laptop. So we will just take you through the introductory training for GIS application on environment impact assessment. The overview of our presentation will cover the area on GIS. Yeah.
Bonnie, okay, sorry, I'm really sorry to bother you. I've got IT asking if you could share the slide that's on your monitor.
Okay. All right, hang on.
It's showing a different slide, so you're speaking to the next slide actually.
Sorry, Vani, you're sharing
This one.
Oh, okay.
maybe stop share.
Stop share.
Share screen again.
Share screen. Yeah.
Then find the PowerPoint show.
All right.
Is it this one?
Okay. Yeah, sure. Is it that one? Set belly.
Yeah, that's the one. Okay.
Sit.
Sorry
Over
about
to
that.
you.
Sorry about that. So yes, we will now. Hang on. Okay, so that is the overview of our presentation today. We'll be explaining on background of GIS and remote sensing, the different components of GIS, spatial data representation, the software that is used for the GIS analysis, the application of GIS, or what can we do with GIS, and how GIS can be applied for EIA. We'll come up, I will also explain on some case study examples that we have done, and concluding remarks. What is GIS? So I think most of us have heard of GIS. So this is a geospatial information system. It integrates hardware, software, and data for capturing, managing, analyzing, and displaying all forms of geographic reference information. So GIS is a system for storing and manipulating this data in a computer system using a software. These computer-based tools are used to examine spatial relationship, pattern, and trends in geography. Just taking us back in history, the first GIS was used in 1854 without computers, of course. So this was used to map a disease outbreak in the city of London. Fundamentally, we still use this type of spatial analysis today, but using more sophisticated softwares and analysis. So GIS is mainly using data to capture, manage, analyze, and display the output as a map. What is remote sensing? So ideally, if someone talks about GIS, then they should also understand what remote sensing is. So remote sensing is a science of obtaining information about objects or areas from a distance typically from aircraft or satellites. And I think most of us are very familiar with this because we use this in our day-to-day work, Google Earth imagery, and other Earth observation data. Remote sensors collect this data by detecting the energy that is reflected from the Earth, and these sensors can be mounted on satellites or aircraft. Sensors can be either passive or active. Passive sensors, they record natural energy reflected from the Earth's surface, which is the sun. So as you see from that diagram, this is a very simple remote sensing process. So rays from the sun that is detected is being reflected from the Earth's features, which is any urban area or forest area or atmosphere, to the satellite. And this will then be received by the satellite antenna receiver. GIS come into effect by using that data received from the satellite to run analysis and application of land cover mapping, of climate change analysis, and atmospheric analysis and correction. Key components of GIS. So we have ideally recognized that there are 5 main components of GIS. The first one is hardware. These are computer systems that is used to run the softwares. They have special requirements due to the processing needs of the analysis to be undertaken. Second is the software that is used. It provides function and tools that needs to store, analyze, and display geospatial functions. So we have put Esri and as one of the softwares that is commonly used, which is ArcGIS, and the open source software, which is Quantum GIS. The third component is, of course, the people who manage the system and develop plans for its application. And these are also people who go out and obtain data that is required for the GIS analysis to be undertaken. Fourth component is the method. A well-designed plan and business rules unique to the organization. Example, a GIS workflow or model of how an organization wants to capture its data, to the method that they will use for cleaning the data, and then how they want it to be projected as a map, as a web application. So these are some of the methods that is required for designing GIS workflows. And the fifth component, which is the most important component, is the data. How are the data collected in-house or secondary sources used? So without data, you cannot run any GIS analysis. So data is considered the most important component in addition to the other 4 components that I've mentioned. Next is spatial data representations. So when we talk about spatial data, what do we have? What do we picture in our head? Okay? So geospatial data is created, shared, and stored in different formats. The 2 primary data types that is used, or as an example of spatial data, are raster and vector data. So vector data, it's a coordinate-based data model representing geographic features such as points, lines, and polygons. They are used to represent discrete objects for points and areas. Raster data, which is the second primary data type, consists of a matrix of cells or pixels. So they're organized into rows and columns, or commonly a grid, and each cell contains a value representing information such as temperature, land use type, etc. So on your right, we have just put an example of the 2 different types of spatial data. So on top, you can see the 3 examples of vector data, which is the administration boundary that is represented as a polygon, streets, which is a line representation, and parcels, again, it is a polygon. And then as a raster, raster model shows land use. As you can see from the pixels and the grids, the different color codes, it conforms to the representation on the ground, real world representation. So you have land use and you have elevation data. So these are a few of the very basic examples of vector and raster data that GIS use for its analysis. Vector data. So vector data, as we've explained in the earlier slide, they are point locations or line locations or areas. So some of the examples that we've included in these slides are cities. They can be recorded as points. Roads, they can be recorded as lines, lakes, as polygons. So these vector data, they are representative on a map by showing it as a point, line, and polygon. So some of the examples for point locations are trees, schools. Of lines, rivers, creeks, streets, and polygons, boundary, forest cover, conservation area, protected areas, and many more. Raster data. Raster data is a spatial data model that defines space. Like we've explained in our previous slide, it's arranged in rows and columns. They are equally sized cells or grids, and each cell has an attribute value and location coordinate. Here on our presentation is an example of a raster satellite imagery. So satellite imagery or Google Earth is an example of a raster data. And also an elevation surface, digital elevation surface, also shown there is an example of a raster surface. So it is different from vector in a sense that points are equally or shown as grids instead of just lines. So these grids have equal value that will aggregate to form the line feature that will be shown for the spatial data. Next is a coordinate system. So a coordinate system is it is a method for identifying the location of a point on the Earth. So it uses two numbers, a coordinate to identify these point locations. The first number is the latitude, or is the X value, indicates how far left or right the point is from the origin. The second number, known as the longitude, Y value indicates how far above or below the point is from the origin. So a system that uses number or coordinates to determine the position of a point or geometric element within a geographic framework is known as a coordinate system. So we've put some examples of country coordinate system there on the table. So for Fiji, it is the Fiji map grid, 1986. Apia, Samoa has a different coordinate system from Tonga, from Port Vila. So these coordinate systems are very important as it will show how a country, how they are being mapped onto the world geographic system. So for instance, Google Earth uses the World Geodetic System. So sometimes when we capture data from coordinates from Google Earth, you can't, by using, for example, using Fiji's data or some of the boundaries, you cannot see your coordinates by using Fiji's boundary. That is because of the different coordinate system that Google Earth is using that cannot be projected using Fiji's coordinate system. So that will need to be reprojected to Fiji's coordinate system in order for you to view it using Fiji's data or Apia's data or Nuku'alofa's data. Now we'll move on to the GIS software that is used. Here we have two of the major GIS software that is used not only in the region, but all over the world. So the first one is the Esri's ArcGIS software. And you have the open source software, which is Quantum GIS. So these two softwares, they do basically do the same thing, but there are very minor differences in terms of what they are capable of doing. So we have listed some of the advantages and not disadvantages, but some of the cons that each software will have. So for ArcGIS, some of the pros that we've identified is it has an extensive geoprocessing tools that can process the most complex of data to the basic ones. Secondly, ArcGIS is constantly updated and improved by the Esri's team. And this is in terms of providing GIS support to the user. Thirdly, is this tool grows with your organization. So Esri's ArcGIS is used for most of the government agencies in the region because of its capacity for storage and support services provided that will enable the organization to grow in terms of data, in terms of users and support. Some of the cons identified with ArcGIS is the license. It's paid yearly in terms of subscription, and also the installation of the software is an extensive process, and it requires activation from the back end of the Esri support team. Now we'll move on to Quantum GIS, which is an open source software, and it's used by most GIS analysts. Some of the pros of QGIS, it is free and very easy to install. No license is required or no payment is required for this software. It has a friendly interface and very easy to use for beginners. And QGIS is a wealth of plugins for data analysis. Some of the cons associated with QGIS is support services is tricky to find, like they are not as organized as the Esri's GIS support team for ArcGIS. And also it's compatible for basic GIS for beginners, and you have to be really well versed in GIS in order to download plugins for other analysis that you want to conduct. And lastly, QGIS does not have a large library of online courses to assist users. Unlike Esri, ArcGIS, they have online free courses that users can use to update their knowledge in GIS. Sorry, any questions so far on the topics that we have covered? GIS, remote sensing, components.
Thank you, Leo. Any questions from the floor? Please use the, you can either send it by chat or just use the, there's a hand, raise the hand icon. There's a bottom icon that check on reactions, click on it and a hand flicks up. Any questions on what we discussed so far? I think for me, it's a rather very technical area, ladies, and I do know that, you know, like with any environment management information system, it requires all the key components to work together. And one of the things, like for example, hardware, software, people, specialists managing it, a methodology to collect data, you know, and all of those things have to be in place to produce excellent analysis using GIS. And but if done, you know, if done really well, you know, it's very useful for depicting information, spatial information. But so any questions? So I've got a question from Rachel Marburg in the World Bank, Sydney. How easy is this for anyone to do some basic analysis? Do you need to be a specialist?
Thank you, Rachel. So like I've mentioned, it's really the very extreme analysis, or shall I say, if it's just basic analysis, then you should be able to do this using GIS, where it's open source, or the ArcGIS software, and there are handbooks available, or guidebooks that can guide you through that for QGIS and ArcGIS. It's very simple, as long as you know what type of analysis, basic GIS analysis that you want to conduct, and what data that you have.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So I think QGIS, I've actually managed to download it and start playing around with it. I have no understanding of GIS, but I think it's open source, so it's for free, but anyone can download it and start. And there's some maps that are already set in default. And I've just sort of opened up a map of Samoa and just started using some of the functions. And for example, just putting lines around the islands of Samoa, just getting to know what how to do that, or put some dots on the map, and then polygons to represent whatever data you want to represent on the map. So it's useful in that sense, but I would imagine that you need to be, like anything else, you need to do it, and learn by doing approach is very much true for this. We've got a question from Barnabas. How applicable GIS is in monitoring and compliance responsibility of government?
Thank you for that. So we will address that question in a few slides ahead of us. So we'll explain how GIS benefits monitoring, and also in terms of compliance.
Yeah.
So we can address that question in the next few slides.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions before we continue? This is just an introduction of GIS to give you an understanding. Then we're going to go straight into how it's useful in EIA with some case studies to back that up. We've got a question from Fiji Aminiasi. How precise is GIS in ArcGIS?
Sorry, precise is in location or analysis?
Let's try both.
Okay.
Location and then analysis.
Okay, ArcGIS and QGIS, like I've explained, they do the same thing, but it is the data that you will be using for the software. That is the main component. So okay. It is just the data. So the precision is for both of them. They do the same thing. They show map-wise. ArcGIS they have colorful maps that you can use. QGIS, you have to really know your way around in order to make it colorful. But for precision-wise, I think it depends on the data that you will be importing into the software. Because if you import say a location of a place that you think it's in the middle of the forest, but it's in the middle of the city, then it is on the people, like I said, one of the components. You really have to capture quality and accurate data. Data accuracy is very important.
Can you give an example of a data can you give an example of a data to input into GIS? Are you talking about coordinates? Can we input coordinates into the GIS? Is that what you mean by data?
Yes.
If you want to map a location and you collect, walk around, you take GPS readings here and here and here, you write it down, then you come into your GIS, you top down the coordinates. Yeah. Will it represent the accurate location of your reading?
Yes, it should. It should go to the location that you had captured the data. GPS is it's a good representation. It captures coordinates of features on the ground. So where your coordinates fall is where that feature is located.
Okay. And if you want to take boundary readings, you can, and then they'll
So
map
yes,
out.
and
Okay.
it should fall in the place where it's supposed to be located.
And if you want to map a conservation area in the middle of each level, you go do your readings and then you plonk it into GIS, and GIS gives you the accurate picture of that conservation area in a map. And then you give it to your policymakers, and then they know develop in that area.
Right, yes, agree.
Okay. Now, any other question? We got one from Malone. Hey Malone, you're asking how to download GIS tools. Go on Google and look up QGIS and follow the self-explanatory notes, and then you can download it. And or the ladies can email you guidance after. But thank you.
Yes.
I've got somebody's hand up. Really good mixture of messaging and who's got their hands up? We got YTV. Well, YTV, please come online, put on your video, please, and ask your question. YTV. Sorry. All right, so he's chosen to post his question. What are the basic tools used in GIS data collection?
Basic tools for data
Yeah.
collection. So the main basic tool used is GPS.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so Amida. Yeah. All
GPS
right.
is the accurate tool to use for capturing your points and location of any feature on the ground.
Okay, but some people, they can download the GPS on your smartphone and use that. But there's
Yeah.
also an actual GPS meter. Are they the same?
No, they differ in terms of the mean sea level accuracy.
Okay.
So yeah, the GPS system that we use, it is very accurate. So compare that to what we download from our phone. There's like a 10-meter difference.
Okay.
So you
So
can
you
use
recommend
your
an actual
phone.
big GPS meter, eh?
Yes.
All right, Naka. All right, let's continue. We've got a few more slides to go, and I'd like the ladies to discuss the case studies. It's really excellent. And then perhaps it's time we can do a live demo. Over to you.
Thank you, Mani. We'll continue with the rest of the slides. So now Mani mentioned about the history of how GIS was used there. In this slide, I'm just talking about the example of how it was first used in London. So it's an example of problem solving from the very first application of GIS, of course, without computers. So in 1854, there was an outbreak of cholera in London, and the source of disease wasn't known. So there was a British physician, Dr. John Snow, that started the mapping, the disease outbreak in each household. And then he not only mapped the households, but he also maps other layers. For example, the roads, the property boundaries, and the water lines. So now you can see, so when all these data were overlaid, so it was very interesting to notice that the cholera cases were only along one water line, as you can see on this map. So there's some sort of pattern on how the disease, to confirm how the disease was spreading throughout that part of the city. Yeah? So this was a big breakthrough that connected geography to public health safety, as you can see on this map here. So the junction between the two streets, and that's highlighted in red, that's where most of the outbreak of cholera was concentrated. So this is an example of how to solve a problem using ArcGIS way back in 1854. So these slides, we are going to talk about what GIS can do. So we mentioned about problem solving and also to make decision and processes, as well as for visualizing of data in spatial environment. So these are some of the ways in which of how GIS can be used. First of all, mapping where things are, the location of, for example, location of different land classes, mapping the quantities in river gravel extraction and location for development, mapping the population density, finding area within the distance within the native forest that needs to be protected or some sort of extraction to take place, and to find the best location for an evacuation center in terms of evacuation during any disasters, and also to map change in forest cover over a number of years, for example, over 5 years, mapping a change. Yeah? This is just a slide talking about the application of GIS in environment impact assessment. Essentially, geographic information is a component of the environment impact assessment, as environmental resources are directly affected by the change in the shape and extent of a proposed disturbance. So the number of steps that are highlighted here. Step 1, it is important that there is an existing GIS setup. So in any organization, before you actually decide if you're going to use GIS. And so these are some of the important consideration that needs to be considered and to enable the easy access of data and flow of information. Also, you need to be aware that the data are available to be able to use GIS, as Vani already mentioned, that data is an important component of GIS. Other data sources from other ministries and stakeholders that you can get data from, and also to assist authorities in environment monitoring and development. And also setting up of environment monitoring committee within the organization on how GIS can assist in providing, that can provide updates in terms of data collection from sampling locations and boundaries from areas of interest. We'll be showing the examples of how GIS has been used. Most of the examples that we'll be showing you today are just from Fiji, from what we have worked on during our work with the government departments. So the first one is the mapping where things are located. So this map shows the location of different land classes within the catchment in closer to one of the largest protected area in Fiji, which is located in Vitilevu. This map shows the location of different land classes from the good arable land to those land classes that cannot be used for agriculture. This is just basically for agriculture development. As you can see, the darker green colors are the good arable land, and the red colors are the not so good arable land, which are very steep areas that needs to be left for conservation purposes. This next map shows the 5-kilometer buffer. As you can see on the map, the red line. So the buffer within the buffer, that those are the area that have some sort of different forest cover type that needs some protection purposes that should not be developed. Or if you're looking at some particular species, you just focus on your study within a 5-kilometer buffer area. And also this map also shows the different land cover within the study area, as you can see on this legend at the bottom right. This next map shows the river gravel extraction license by district. Basically, it's just showing us that how many license has been issued, how many gravel extraction license has been issued in different provinces. So it's just some sort of like to update or information that that has been requested. So this map shows active gravel extractions license in Fiji. So this is needed in terms of planning or decision making. So now we will go on to our case study, and Vani will be talking about this case study, and then we will move, and I'll come in the rest of the case studies before we conclude the presentation. Vinaka Kasanga. So some of the case study examples that we had worked on when working for government ministries here in Fiji are listed there on this particular slide. First one is the EIA verification of rock resource extraction site. We have mineral exploration, boundary demarcation, impact of landslide in a protected area, the mapping of heritage buildings that are vulnerable to hazards, and change detection mapping of land cover using remote sensing. So the first case study is the application of GIS for EIA site verification. The problem statement is to identify and verify the area of interest in a new application for the purpose of extracting boulders, including river gravel for road construction. The use of GIS is to ensure that information and data derived from consultant report is accurate, and whereby approving authority will grant approval based on the accuracy of the consultant's report. What is the output from the using GIS is the area of interest is verified by ground truthing, along with resources available on site as the EIA report indicated. So for this particular scenario, next slide. This particular scenario on your top left, the area highlighted in purple, this was the area that was applied for by a developer. The application came for this area in the EIA report. So upon ground truthing, the developer had identified another area, a different area from that which was proposed in the report, and that is the one on the marked in blue down here. So it is important for regulating authorities on ground truthing based on the EIA report submitted by consultants. So this is the scenario. A different area was identified on the EIA report, and another area was identified by the developer. So upon the team's ground truthing, they managed to identify the area. So using Google Earth imagery, they're able to demarcate the portion of the river here in yellow, which is a vector data, which is a line. So this is the area of the river. This portion of the river is to be licensed out to this developer. So they've marked the river, and also down here on this this picture, you've seen that same river, they have polygonized it. They've used the area, they marked out the area so that they can see the total area covered by the extraction boundary. So also you can see from this imagery is that they've marked out the access road, which is one of the requirements from the approving authority, accessibility to the site. And they've also shown that there's some community living downstream. So this is where GIS comes in handy. So GIS will make sure that everything that is reported in the EIA report is verified on the ground. So this is to ensure that approving authorities are able to approve reports on the basis of ground truthing data that is collected by the government agencies to verify that which is reported by the consultants. And here in this picture shows some staffs from government departments carrying out their water quality testing, which is done prior to issuing of license. So these water quality results or values are recorded and are kept. So this will be correlated against that which is reported by the consultant in the EIA report itself. So if there is an anomaly in the values of the water quality captured by the government departments and that which was reported by the consultant, then this will need both parties to sit and also to work together on way forward on having a field visit and both conducting water quality testing on the same day. So just from this exercise, we found out that it was really important for government agencies and approving authorities and regulators to make sure that every information in the EIA report is verified on the ground, or ground truthing is carried out. And this is to ensure that both parties are on the same page. And then if there, in the future, if there's any issues with pollution that will impact this community down here, then this has been captured in this initial stage of ground truthing by both the agency and the developers.
Vani, thank you. Can
Yep,
you go
yep.
back? Just want to
Yeah.
ask a question there. So essentially what you're saying here, just so I can understand, is that the map at the top we started off with,
Yeah,
is the consultant gave a different location to what you actually discovered on the ground when you did the ground truthing, the field visits.
yes,
Right, okay. And then in terms of the water testing,
yeah,
so that is a government agency collecting water samples for quality measurements as a baseline before the development as part of the EIA review process?
yes,
Okay, and then that's the baseline. But you can also use the developer or the consultant or the developer will also be responsible to perform water quality sampling throughout the project period and providing those data to the Department of Environment or the EIA regulators, who are also doing their separate measurements, and then cross-reference whether the data are actually matching.
yes,
And then you can plonk them down using GIS where the data quality is along the river.
yes.
All right, so that's the application for monitoring and compliance raised by Aminiasi earlier on.
Yeah.
Naka. All right, so please continue.
So the second case study is how do we apply GIS for mineral exploration boundary demarcation? So this case study is, the problem statement is to verify approved boundary for new exploration application. This is to ensure that there is no overlap of boundaries of the proposed exploration area with other conservation area of interest. What was the output? Approved boundary was adjusted to exclude the Ramsar site and other key biodiversity areas, in addition to mapping of all water sampling points around the boundary by the government agencies. So this also encouraged interministry collaboration with EIA regulators for proper and accurate data that will support better informed decision making. So the map on your left is an example of a mineral exploration site in the upper Viti level, upper Namosi area. So the polygon here in this rectangular polygon shows the exploration boundary that was issued to this particular company. And on the top half, as you can see, they're highlighted with a red boundary, is one of Fiji's Ramsar sites. So this license was issued, and all the regulating authorities found out that it had overlapped onto this Ramsar site, the Upper Navua Conservation Area. So GIS was really helpful in the sense that through the overlaying and through collaboration with other stakeholders, they were able, with the, particularly in this case is the Ministry of Forestry, with their data. So this was being able to overlay with the mineral data, which is the exploration boundary area. And with other key biodiversity area, that's the other data that they have. So whilst overlaying this, the regulating authority that issued the license, they were able to adjust the boundary. We cannot adjust the Ramsar site boundary, but we can adjust the license boundary. So upon field visits and talks with other stakeholders, and also with the exploration company, we were able to use GIS to properly demarcate the new license boundary and leaving enough space or buffer zone to the boundary for the Ramsar site on the top. And this does not affect the exploration work. And at the same time, it ensures that development, we need development. So development continues, our exploration continues, but we have safeguarded the Ramsar site. So from there, we were able to understand the importance of collaboration with other agencies. Like we've mentioned, like having a GIS system, you will need to identify which data that you have and what data do you need that will help you to have a more thorough perception of the area that you want to develop or the area that is to be monitored. So it is important to have data collaboration and memorandum of agreements with other agencies that can supply you with data. And this will enable informed decision-making, not only for government agencies, but also for developers. And on this map, this shows the sampling site, the water sampling location for this exploration area. So this sampling location is this that is located here in the middle. So upon adjusting the boundary, we had to ensure that the sampling location is of the distance given to the river, the closest waterways, the main waterways, which is the Nabua River, is enough in terms of pollution or in terms of spillage. It will be contained within this boundary, and this can also be monitored and be well monitored by the company and also the regulating authorities and government agencies. So these are the sampling locations that we had marked. And also within these sampling locations, they are closely located to the drilling holes that is used for exploration by this company. So from this exercise, we found that it is important to have data available and to know what data that you need in order to carry out analysis and GIS analysis. So for this actual map that we use, these are the data that was used and overlays, and then we adjust other data that needs to be adjusted and identify areas that have been sampled. So it is very informative, and at the same time, it is very transparent, as all stakeholders are aware of what is happening where and where which boundary ends and which boundary starts. So all stakeholders are aware, and there's information flow in all agencies and also for developers alike.
Vani,
Yeah.
can I ask one question? Sorry, while your topic is fresh. So, can you explain a bit more why was the original map encroaching onto the Ramsar conservation site?
Okay, so this original map was submitted by a consultant, the area. So the consultants, they submit their report and they note down the coordinates and the location of the boundary. So this was then mapped when the consultant brought it to our GIS team. So bearing in mind for Fiji, the EIA is important. So this is still in its initial stage. That is why it was easy, not easy. It was okay for us to adjust boundary without any legal implications to the company itself. And it's more on having talks, continuous talks with all parties. So for this case, this was submitted by the company on the area that they want to be explored for exploration. But then at the same time, we, the government agencies were not, they did not have the data for this conservation area. So upon stakeholders meeting and requesting data from other agencies, then this was identified by the authorities, and we took action to address it before exploration has gone on to its very later stage. So exploration still has not started. So it was okay that developers and stakeholders were able to adjust the boundary.
So in the EIA process that we're promoting, which is in line with the SPREP regional EIA guidelines, so that takes place during the review of the EIA report. And so that takes time. But one of the key things I'm hearing from you is that although the EIA regulator, being the Department of Environment, is responsible for this review, what is important is to be able to connect with the other ministries who do have the data within the same government, and then bring those data in so that you could analyze further, and then you can come up with this sort of map. And then otherwise you would have never found out that it was encroaching. So the message is when you're reviewing EIAs, it's important to involve other key ministries that have mandates, that have regulatory functions as well with the data in-house to bring into the review so you can have a complete holistic picture of the analysis. So that's what I'm taking away from you. And then you decided that it was encroaching and make adjustments. So thank you very much. That's very, very clear. Okay, continue.
Thank you. Now I'll give it to Kasanga to explain on the impact of landslide.
Question from Tonga Anna. It says, how easy is it to obtain data from other ministries and authorities? Is there a process or data sharing policy regarding the sharing of GIS data?
Thank you for that. For example, in Fiji, I think it's a ministry to ministry policy that your ministry drop MOUs or MOAs of data usage, and bearing in mind that there are data custodians and referencing all the data that is used to the agency that is the custodian of the data. So it is just, it's internal. That's what it's more on having agreements drawn up between the agencies.
And also just to chime in, it's a sensitive issue because although they all work under one government, they all have different sort of laws and mandates, but there should be, in the case that there is no policy of data sharing, then that's something that you need to address first between the ministries. But there should be data sharing protocols in place and arrangements and of course confidentiality clauses to protect the data that's been used. So I wouldn't say it's an easy thing, Anna. I think it's something that if you should discuss with it's a management. I think you need to elevate it to a management level and then take it from there. I want to at this time introduce the Acting Director of Environmental Monitoring and Governance Program here at SPREP. This is Ratu Chope Tavanetivalu, who just joined us. So thank you, Chope. You might have something to say.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and thank you, ladies. If I may make a response on this excellent question raised by Anna. Just to follow on from the response from the moderator, it can be easy, it can also be hard. In terms of EIA, being an EIA practitioner for so many years, having an EIA report, if it is needed under the EIA, since it is a legislated tool, then it should be easy. If a data is requested by the regulatory agency for decision-making process, for decision-making purposes for a particular EIA, then the responsible ministry must oblige. and they have to provide the necessary data. But then we can look at in the other context on what's the purpose of requesting the GIS or data. So it has its own areas. It can be easy and it can be hard. But from the perspective of EIA, to me as a practitioner, it should be easy. Thank you.
Naka.
Thank you. We'll continue with the case study. This example that I'll be talking about is the use of GIS, application of GIS to identify risk areas in terms of landslide and also for other disasters. Okay, in this example, this is about the study that was undertaken in the Sovi Basin, again, the largest protected area, which is in Vitilevu. The problem statement is to identify areas that are landslide prone. As you know, as the area that we're talking about is quite steep, and which could be a threat to species that are endangered species of plants and animals. So this area is one of high biodiversity value area. And also, so we can undertake appropriate intervention to identify with the communities the way forward to address the issue. For example, there's some of the information that we require to identify the landslide hazard zones, the plant species, the birds species in the area, and also the species that are exposed to the different hazards. So in terms of data, in terms of your project, these are some of the requirements to get the necessary data that you need. We need the protected area boundary, the digital elevation model, the soil type, the rainfall, and where the different species are distributed, and of course the roads, the topography, and other necessary data in the area. You also need to have information on cultural and natural heritage sites. So in this study, just showing a unique biodiversity in the area, in the Sovi Basin. There's some endemic birds, endangered birds, a beautiful landscape, and also native forests that are not disturbed. In this study, we use remote sensing was used, mostly the satellite data. As you can see, these are some of the outputs that were produced. This map shows the location of species in green. The map on your far right shows the high areas that has a very high risk of landslide. And these areas, landslide areas are further categorized into different categories, whether it's a low, medium, and high risk areas. And the map at the bottom just shows you the different categories of hazards of landslide risks. So this map shows the high risk areas for landslide where most of the species are found, plant species. So this is in terms of planning purposes. So it tells you, okay, this area, for any development, we should not move it to this area because there's a high number of endemic species of plants and animals. So these are some of the information that EIA officers need in order to make those decisions, because the map is able to tell you, okay, this area is a very high risk from landslide, so we should not plan any development, or this area has a high number of endemic species, so we have to make sure that we do not carry out a development in those areas. Also, we did some assessment using not only natural sites, we also look at heritage buildings, build heritage. This study was undertaken on the World Heritage Site of Fiji in Levuka, so to identify buildings that are vulnerable to hazards, and also to develop a DRM plan to guide the protection of this significant town. So we did some data collection. This project came about after Cyclone Winston, which causes a lot of damage to the heritage buildings in the heritage town of Levuka. So this data, there were a lot of effort put in to collect data after the cyclone. So this data that were collected allowed us to carry out this project. So to identify buildings that are that was severely damaged, that needed a lot of work to be done. And these are the information we added into this study. So that potential, and also areas with a potential impact in case if there's another disaster. So what can we do to protect these buildings? Yeah, the risk data that was collected, we identify risk from landslide because this town is very, there's very limited area of flat land, but the area is very steep. The risk of flooding because it's close to there's a river that runs along the town, and also it's close to the coastline. So the risk from flooding or storm surges. So from all the data that were collected, these were overlay, and then these are the map that was produced. In blue shades, this is the distance where the wave traveled during Cyclone Winston, travel inland, and you can see there are which are the buildings that are most vulnerable to the effect of storm surges. And on the map at the right, it shows the hazards just from the environment survey we carried out, just by looking at the nearby river. And these are some of the issues can arise, like if people dump their rubbish in the river. So it causes, when the heavy rain comes, it causes increased flooding in the area. So these are some of the things that we have to consider just doing this hazard assessment. So from overlaying all those data, some of the data were collected from the Levuka Town Council, and inundation data we're talking about data sharing. So in circumstances like this, we have to consult the right people in order to get the right data you want. So in this case, we had to consult SOPAC, SPC, because they did a study after Cyclone Winston. So they were able to share the data with us. And also, we did some GIS modeling. The power of GIS, you can carry out some modeling to identify areas that you want to mark out for flooding risk. So I think the main point I want to stress here is that even we discussed about the data sharing agreement, but you have to go to the right organization to get the data that you want. And also maybe you can discuss with them the benefits of the data that they will share with you, so that they are willing to provide the data to you. So this is just, and also we have to confirm with them that whatever data they're giving you, it's going to be used for the purpose that you're asking for. And also in terms of acknowledging the provider of the data when you use the data for those analysis or, to produce those reports. So those are some of the main points that needs to be considered when you're trying to get data from other sources. Okay, this is the map that was produced based on that study. We identify hotspots for landslide, flooding, and storm surges. The hotspots are in the areas with a slope greater than 25 degrees. And then the type of soils within the non-arable classes make it more vulnerable to the impacts of landslide. So the map shown on your right identifies those areas. The purple are the area, the hazard areas for storm surges, and the red are the landslide areas, and the blue are the areas vulnerable to flooding. As you can see, this is so you have to look at also the buildings that are vulnerable to this within the path of these hazards. So it's like a good mapping tool for planning and decision making. This example is just showing the change detection at one of our protected area, the Singatoka Sand Dune. Because of the increasing threats to the loss of biodiversity at the park, particularly due to the illegal cases of sand extraction. And the aim of this case study was to investigate the changes that have taken place over the span of 10 years, so that we can quantify, we can also verify that really that sand extraction has been happening, whether it's through illegal sand extraction or through just the changes in the environment from like people that are commuting the park or other courses. So this was conducted using satellite data over the years of 2010 to 2020. Yes, using the remote sensing tool, I just have to mention here that the good thing about the two software that we discussed earlier, they have the capabilities to also produce remote sensing output with the tool that's available in the two applications. Before, we used to have this separate application that we use for remote sensing. But in this case, the two software gives you the capacity, gives you the tools to be able to work on remote sensing. So that's another plus to the software that we talked about today. So the image on your left is just showing, this is the image from 2010. And the top right, yeah, it's the image from 2015, and the one at the bottom is the result of the classification from 2020. As you can see, there's some changes in the area and extent of the sand dunes. Also, there's some red areas to showing there's some development happening, some the cleared forest. So this is telling us it's not only from sand extraction, but also from logging, cutting down of the forest within the sand dunes boundary. So this information was extracted using remote sensing and the satellite data that were provided. The next, this is like just to conclude on the discussion that we've had so far. So GIS can assist the EIA regulators organize existing data for use. So in planning, management, monitoring of natural resources, also to analyze data to understand the trends over time. Also, GIS can support the verification process, whether the project meets the requirements for it to be environmentally friendly. I think this is very relevant to us, to the topic that we are talking about today. And also today, GIS is being applied around the world to virtually all the problems that we face. Example that I discussed, the very first GIS that was used. And also GIS assists in providing decisions that are well informed by providing data coupled with analysis. So like we've shown in the case study that we presented there. So overall, GIS is becoming an amazing tool for improving human understanding based on changes happening around us through better informed decision making. And just in summary, in all of that we've discussed, and we've got some take-home message that you can ponder on or maybe think about. So this GIS is a very powerful tool from all the application that we've seen, and also the software that we've talked about. Also, like an important component is data. So if it's properly analyzed, it can produce useful output for your purpose. And also that can assist and support in project planning, management, and decision making. Also, it would greatly assist in your work in terms of processing data that you may already have to make informed decision on EIA. There was a question raised on how you can collect data. Well, you can use GPS. You can also use Google image. You can also use some of the data that you may already have, some of the maps that have been corrected, historical data that you may have in your files, that you can use those information, or some of the maps that was done in some years back. You can bring those maps. There's a tool that can in GIS can help you convert those maps into GIS data, into polygons, point, or line format. So those are like some of the things that we've discussed, and this is what we've discussed and presented to you this afternoon. So that's all from us. Now we'll leave it for you. If you have any questions.
Minaka, I'll give it to the floor. Anybody has any questions, please use the chat box or raise up your hand. It'd be nice if you could raise up your hand. We'd like to see you verbalize in a video manner, so we can get a mixture of writing and speaking directly to the floor. Anyone has any questions? There's a chat there. Does it say? Okay, I've got a, hold on. Okay, a comment by Kisa. Data sharing continues to be a challenge in Samoa. A comment from Kerekolio Dominico. Thank you, Vani. Where can we obtain GIS data of conservation areas, such as Ramsar, which was highlighted in the first scenario? Perhaps you can just Vani can just quickly respond to Kerekolio. Where can we get the data for Ramsar?
Vinaka, so the Ramsar data was acquired from the Department of Forestry in Fiji. So they've got data for key biodiversity areas and conservation areas.
Naka, a comment and a question, I think, from Moon Chan. One of the key constraints of using GIS for EIA is the time and resources needed to build the database and input and process the relevant data. Considering a small island state with limited data sets, is this worth it? What other options are available, or is it ground truthing a more economical solution? That's a very good question.
Okay, so I think for that question, GIS is very useful. It is a powerful tool, like we've stressed, and I think it is the onus is on the agencies, whether it's how they are portraying their data out there in terms of EIA. I do understand that the software itself, and if for users, if they haven't started using it, it may seem overwhelming at first, but from our experience, we believe that once you know how to go about uploading data and using GIS, you know that it is not time consuming at all. You can even work through your spare times. And in terms of data, like Kasanga has mentioned, for GIS to work, you should have data, and data has to be attached to a location. Sometimes we have reports, we have Excel spreadsheets, and we know where the location of that particular feature is. So it is just a matter of you trying to train yourself or wanting to know and understand more of how you can apply GIS. It is a very useful skill to have. And especially in the area of EIA, this will better assist you in terms of how you will monitor any development or that is being approved. So, like I said, for any development, you will have all types of data. Like we said, water sampling, soil sampling. You have there are villages or settlements. These are all data. There are schools that are close by. And then, yeah, so these are some of the things that you can slowly build up. It doesn't mean that you should have like a very big GIS setup. You can just start with being one person, having an interest to download software, slowly compile your data. But you have to start from somewhere. Yeah.
I'll just chime in now, Vani. Listen, Moon, I think if you're asking if it's worth it, I think it's absolutely worth it. You just basically have to compare with the present situation where you are. Do you have a proper information management system in place to capture, store, collect, analyze data so that you're able to provide factual recommendations to policymakers within the ministry or at a cabinet level? And so you have to have proper systems in place backed up by a methodology for collecting accurate data and for ground truthing data, so that, you know, whatever analysis you do, if the data is up to date and very relevant, the analysis should be also very, very good, very factual for policy making. So it's really, it's sort of comparing with what you have and what you don't. So in my opinion, I think it is worth it, but it's, unless you do it, you won't believe it until you actually, choose to practice whatever system. But for us, we're proposing a GIS as a very relevant tool for EIA. I'll move on to the next comment and question by Silas Tipaya. What GIS software is well known to present better visibility of data in terms of the quality, and what may be other contributing factors that may hinder proper presentation of data?
Thank you for that question. I think both of the software perform the same kind of analysis like we mentioned there. They are pros and cons, but if you're looking at in terms of just producing a map, you can use QGIS. But ArcGIS is a licensed software. You need to have the resources to be able to get the software, right? But QGIS is it's an open source. There's a lot of support available out there. There's a community of users that that can provide that support. So yeah, it's simply like in terms of if you have the resources, well, you can use the ArcGIS. But if you do not have that much resources, so you can go for open source software. But essentially, the type of analysis you can get are both similar in terms of producing a map, provide simple analysis of the questions that you want answered.
Yeah, Naka, Aminiasi from Fiji, GIS, ArcGIS boundary can be taken as true final boundary for the EIA reports?
GIS and yes, okay, sorry. ArcGIS, they can be taken as the true boundary because they have been referenced from the ground. So whenever we're conducting ground truthing, the data that is displayed on the map is what is captured from the ground using GPS.
All right, providing you're using the proper country
system.
System. All right, thank you. Joshua Kara, are there other GIS softwares apart from Esri, ArcGIS, and QGIS available?
As far as we know, that the one that is mostly used by GIS analysts and users globally is either QGIS or ArcGIS.
Thank you. There's a question from Galaxy A20. Sorry, Mike, don't know you. Perhaps you can provide us with your name and the country where you're coming from. Does SPREP has a GIS and remote sensing professional team that can share information in the region?
Thank you. So we are the GIS team at SPREP, and we are happy to provide any assistance or questions that you may have with regards to GIS analysis.
All right, we've got a comment, a Hail Mail comment from Immaculata. Please help Chup with GIS software. Thanks, Mike. Noted. We've got Nialaz Posanu. Hi there. You mentioned GIS as a powerful tool. Is there any limitation or any disadvantage to this tool being used?
Thank you for that. So like we've mentioned, the only input that you put in the software will enable you to generate what you want to project. If you're putting in bad data, you will not get any output like a map that you desire for the purpose. So that is what we are stressing about. So the data that you put in is important, and that the tool itself is powerful, but it depends on the type of data that you are inputting into the software itself.
Yeah, true. You can't, if you input data on extraction points, mineral extraction points, and you're asking GIS query to give you a map of the beautiful flower of Fiji, that's not going to give you the beautiful flower of Fiji. Unless you collect data of all the different types of flowers and tag it in terms of their beauty, you will not get that. So it depends. It really depends on what you want and to use GIS for, and then that defines the data sets that you have to collect, input to GIS, and then run the query to give you an analysis. But so I think that's basically the answer there. Any other questions? We've got Rachel. Hi, Rachel. Rachel's my boss actually in the World Bank in Sydney. Hi, Rachel. Please come on. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Mipelli. Look, I just wanted to pick up on the "is it worth it" question, because I think it's a really good question. And like everything in life, the answer depends. So I would really encourage you to think about this in relation to risk and the size of your project and the nature of the impacts it's going to bring up for your countries and where you're working. I think the other thing that's really important is that once you start using a system like this, and I'm sure, Vanny, you will agree, the more you realize it's possible to do. So as you set it up in the beginning, perhaps while you're preparing the project or you're using GIS to understand impacts or preparing an impact assessment, it becomes a tool that you can build on throughout the life of the project. We know that projects take a couple of years to construct. They operate for a long time and you monitor them. And so you're building on that all the way through that process. Not only do you have something for that project, but you have something valuable for the next project that you're doing. It could be in the same location, it could be different, but you have a comparable data set, you understand the analysis process. It really is something that will expand to do whatever you want it to do. And I have seen it used in incredibly powerful ways. And I think for me as a social specialist primarily, that application of environment and social data together is really important. So you might look at things like health facilities along with water facilities, looking at the cholera example that we had in the beginning. You know, if you understand you're having health impacts, but you know you're in close proximity to medical treatment, that, you know, there's lots of different ways you can think about impacts and mitigation. So I think it's just incredibly powerful, and starting really simple is a really good way to learn about the capabilities and decide how it will apply to your situation and to your projects. And you know, there's potential for getting specialists and amazing data sets, but even really simple stuff can be really valuable to you. It can be a data management tool, so you can use it to record where and how you did consultation with communities, for example. You know, it's a record keeping tool for things like that that really matter in terms of when did we last speak to people, what did they say to us. So it has so many applications that I think this has been a really excellent summary of how to get started, how to think about this, and how to, you know, really build something that is relevant to your situation. So I really appreciate learning a bit more from you ladies. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks, Ray. Yeah, I mean, one thing is the utility value, how useful it is to you. Another thing is the sustainability of the data for now and onwards. Because, you know, you'll be in that position and then somebody else will come in and somebody else will come thereafter. And if you have a proper system, the data system in place, where, you know, that person will benefit from a historical sets of data that they can make meaningful decisions over time. So I think that's something, but what we see in Pacific Island countries is, in most cases, most Department of Environment do not have a proper environmental management information system. But you are a regulatory agency. So how is it that you could deregulate if you don't have proper data over time to make, you know, decisions or recommendations? All right. I've got a comment from Barnabas Bago. I think it's more of a comment. So GIS is a powerful tool for EIA and other important applications in other areas. EIA process, it's important for national governments to share the EIA, and relevant data are part of the EIA reports. And ground truthing is an important verification step before approval of issuance of a development consent. Thank you very much, Barnabas. I do agree. Lavani Tawake, have you got an example of how GIS can be used for a social impact assessment? I think Rachel touched a bit on that as well. So I think we've addressed that. Moon Chan, yes, I was curious about actually creating a data set for an area that does not have an existing data set file. Thanks for that, Rachel. That's a comment. A comment from our colleague, Gregory, Dr. Barbara. There are other software packages, but not all are as easy to use or compatible. So it is important to try to use a system that is compatible with your existing data sets. Apart from Google Arc Esri, there are batch of Geo, Map Info, Map2, OpenStreetMap, etc. So be aware of which system is used on your project and its limitations with integrating other data sources. A GIS is very powerful, but if you use different coordinate systems, simple boundary errors can occur without ground truthing. Good industry development, GID, is awesome. GIS is awesome. It just needs some understanding to get the best out of it. All right, thanks very much. Basin San Madri, can you provide examples, brackets, maps of two GIS software to demonstrate the difference between the two software? I don't think we have time to do that, Basin, and you're we're assuming that we have a license for Esri, which we don't. I think we're using the open free, so we can't give you a comparative analysis right now. But please feel free to refer to the slide which the ladies have explained the difference, the pros and cons between the two. Rachel Marber, it's a great way to recall community facilities and places of importance or heritage, traditional grounds, meeting places, traditional villages, residents, in my view. For example, it could recall cultural sites, health clinics, community facilities, schools, etc. It can also recall transport, etc. So that's a comment from my colleague Rachel in Sydney. Do we have any other question from the floor?
Thank you, Mepelo. Just a comment from us. Just to clarify, SPREP has both ArcGIS and open source software.
Okay.
It's
All
just
right,
that we do not have time to show a demo today, maybe another time.
All right. So perhaps a follow-on a webinar specifically on the difference between the two. But perhaps if you can, or they can reach out to you and have continue the conversation. And then take it from there. Any comments from you, Ratu? Any questions? Okay. No questions from the floor?
The slides you made.
Yeah, I'll let that. That's fine. All right, I don't see any more questions. So I think I'll take that as no more questions on the floor. Now, at this time, let me thank the two trainers from SPREP, Vani Koroisa Manunu and Kasanga. Please join me thanking them very much for their excellent presentation. I've learned a lot, ladies. I've learned a lot. Enough to go and download it and have a look at it, but I've learned a lot. So I want to thank you very much for the time that you prepared your presentation, the thinking process behind that, and your explanation today. I think many of us understood a lot of the technical explanation narrative that came in the slides, but you really made it fun with the case studies, which is something the participants asked for in the last evaluation. So I want to thank you very much on that. Thanks, Brett, for providing you guys availability here. Before I'll just say a few more things and then I'll hand over to Ratu Chope for a final comment. Like last time, we had an evaluation form online, SurveyMonkey. We'll send the same, do the same. We'll send it out. Could I request all of you? We have 60 participants. Thank you very much. We've got 60 participants for today's module. That is excellent across the whole Pacific region. So I want to thank all of you. Please, it would be great to have those 60 participants fill in the evaluation form that we'll send. Those who complete the evaluation will send out the training certificate as well. All of you requesting the presentations by these ladies, they will be made available exclusively and only on SPREP's PNEA, or the Pacific Network of Environment Assessment, and cannot be shared individually. From me, asking me, you'll have to go through the PNEA and download. They're readily available, and please go ahead and download them. I'm only kidding. You can just ask. You can email me as well. So that's a joke. We're ending it. I think I'll hand over to Ratu Chope for final comments.
Colleagues, yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. And colleagues, on behalf of the Director General and the PLP ESS partnership through World Bank, ADB, and USP, would like to take this time to say thank you so much for all your participation today. And I would like to pick on two questions that were raised from you participants, whether SPREP has a GIS team. And I really like how it was answered. Yes, the two ladies who presented today are here to promote and strengthen the GIS work of SPREP for the member countries and for you partners. And please, as raised by Mr. Moderator today on the evaluation, please provide with us on how we can assist you with in strengthening or be guided by you in strengthening GIS work in the region. And thank you to my colleague from Chuk. Yes, may I advise you also that Chuk is a member country for SPREP. Please do contact with the SPREP for us to know the more and discuss more the interest from you in upgrading or assisting you with the capacity in the area of GIS. Colleagues, this is again a start of the second phase of this PLP EIS capacity building program. And thank you to our moderator for the good organization that he put in place with the support of the other partners, SPREP, USP, and ADB. And all I would like to say is thank you. Thank you very much for all your engagement. And I'll send a separate acknowledgement to the two ladies who presented today, and I have my own conversation with them. With that, please don't forget to join in again tomorrow at 2 o'clock. And I know the moderator will touch on that. Pinakaboleo again from SPREP. We'll see you again tomorrow. Thank you.
Nakaratu. Okay, thank you. So that's my segue in for tomorrow. Please, I hope we can repeat the same number of 60 for tomorrow's session. We've got module 10 titled Scoping for EIA. So we're trying to ask these two questions: how to prepare responsible terms of reference for EIA studies, or guidance tips on the selection and management of consultants. Please refer to the training plan that was attached to my original email. There's a description of what that is. Dr. Gregory Barbara is presenting tomorrow and supported by Ratu Jope Tavanitevalu. So in the meantime, let me thank you and see you tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Great job.
No problem.